My name is Emily. I wouldn't describe my life as flawless, but I've always been grateful, reminding myself that things could be worse. I've been married to my husband, Michael, for 7 years. Most of our time together has been pleasant, especially in the beginning. However, over the years, I noticed that he became increasingly preoccupied with his career and less attentive toward me. He stopped engaging in meaningful conversations and seldom asked about my feelings. Despite this, I made every effort to preserve our relationship. Michael has a son from his prior marriage named Jason. He was the opposite of Michael in many ways. When we first met, he appeared somewhat reserved, but as time passed, we grew close. Whenever we spent time together, Jason would listen intently and genuinely try to understand me, something I had yearned for. One day, everything shifted. Michael left for a 3-day business trip, and I expected to have the house to myself. However, Jason unexpectedly showed up at the door. He had returned from college for a short vacation and wanted to spend time with his father. Upon learning that Michael was away, Jason suggested we hang out instead and stepped inside. We decided to prepare dinner together. At first, everything felt ordinary, but then I noticed Jason watching me in a way that made me question his intentions. Initially, I thought I had misunderstood, but there came a moment when I couldn't ignore the different look in his eyes. That night, Jason and I had a deep conversation. He usually spoke about his aspirations and plans, but this time he opened up on a more emotional level. He shared how distant his father had been with him, and in that moment, I realized we both felt isolated in this house. This shared understanding brought us closer, but I became acutely aware of how fragile the boundary between right and wrong could be. I knew I needed to set limits, but my emotions left me conflicted. Jason lingered in the living room late into the night. We started watching a movie together, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I could feel his gaze on me, and it evoked a mix of discomfort and intrigue. After the movie ended, we stayed up talking. Unlike the shallow conversations I often had with Michael, Jason listened attentively, making me feel heard and understood, something I had been missing for a long time. As the night wore on, I suggested he go to bed, but Jason hesitated, saying, "Talking to you feels so good. Can I stay a little longer?" His words deepened the emotional turmoil I was already experiencing. I agreed, and we sat side by side in silence for a while. Then Jason broke the quiet, saying, "Sometimes I realize how much I need someone like you to talk to." His voice was soft and earnest. I smiled and replied, "I'm glad you're here," not realizing how my words might affect him. Jason looked into my eyes and gently took my hand. "I think you're truly special," he said. I was at a loss for words. For a brief moment, it felt like our mutual loneliness had created an invisible bond. I knew I had to end the moment, so I slowly pulled my hand back and said, "Jason, what you just said surprised me. I think we all sometimes misinterpret signals." Even as I spoke, I felt a pang of sadness. Jason nodded and said, "You're right. I may have overstepped, but I hope you don't misunderstand me. I respect you deeply." He stood up quickly and added, "Good night, Emily," before retreating to his room. That night, I struggled to sleep, overwhelmed by my feelings for Jason and the confusion they stirred. I didn't know where this situation might lead, but I couldn't stop replaying our interactions in my mind. The next morning at breakfast, Jason acted as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't hide my inner turmoil. We maintained our distance for the rest of the day, but it didn't erase the lingering tension. When Michael returned home, life seemed to return to normal, yet I knew something had shifted within me. The fleeting moments with Jason remained vivid in my memory. Despite recognizing how perilous my feelings were, I couldn't completely control them. Months went by. Jason returned to university, and daily life settled into its usual rhythm, but the confusion within me persisted. I didn't know what the future held, but I sensed this story was far from over. I couldn't stop reflecting on that fleeting moment we had shared. Michael's distant demeanor persisted. He would return home late from work, exchange only a few trivial words with me, and plant himself in front of the TV. It felt as though we were strangers merely coexisting under the same roof. Eventually, I learned when Jason would be returning home. It was his university break, and he planned to stay with us for a few weeks. I found myself both eagerly anticipating his arrival and feeling ashamed of the emotions that stirred within me. Yet, This sense of expectation was the very thing that kept me moving forward. When Jason arrived, everything appeared to be the same as before. I could still sense the warmth in his gaze, but this time I resolved to maintain clear boundaries between us. However, things didn't unfold as I had intended. One evening, when Michael informed me he'd be working late, Jason and I were left alone. We shared a quiet dinner, and then Jason suggested, "Do you want to go outside for some fresh air?" We stepped onto the porch and sat on the swing. The evening air was cool and tranquil, and the stars seemed unusually brilliant. After a long silence, Jason spoke, his voice steady yet heartfelt. "Emily, being here always makes me feel good. You know that, don't you?" My heart began to race. Unsure how to respond, I simply nodded. "My relationship with my dad has always been distant," he continued. "But you've made me feel something more. Talking to you, being near you, it gives me strength." His words both touched and unsettled me. A part of me screamed that this was wrong, yet another part was deeply moved. Jason turned to face me, his eyes meeting mine with intensity. "I can't hide how I feel anymore. Maybe it's wrong, but I can't stop myself," he confessed. I felt cornered. Standing abruptly, I took a deep breath and replied, "Jason, what you're saying is putting me in an incredibly difficult position. I'm your stepmother. You know this isn't right." My words faltered because deep down, my heart was conflicted. "You're right, Emily," Jason admitted, "but I can't deny these feelings. I don't want to hurt you. I just needed you to know." That night, everything became even more complicated. Although Jason promised to give me space, the tension between us grew undeniable. His very presence stirred emotions I couldn't fully suppress. One morning, as we sat together at breakfast, Jason broke the silence. "Emily, I don't want to make things hard for you, but I need you to know that these feelings are real. Thinking about you makes me happy." I didn't know where this connection with Jason might lead, but a part of me wasn't ready to let it go. After Jason's confession, we both became hyper-aware of each other. This heightened awareness left me feeling uneasy, torn between what I knew was right and the emotions I couldn't escape. One day, Michael came home early. Jason and I were chatting in the kitchen, sharing a coffee, when Michael walked in. He stared at us briefly, his expression unreadable, before asking with a faintly mocking tone, "What are you two so cheerfully discussing?" Jason quickly deflected, steering the conversation to something casual. But Michael's look left me deeply uncomfortable. That evening, Michael approached me in the bedroom with an uncharacteristic intensity. "Emily, do you still love me?" he asked, his voice tinged with an unfamiliar vulnerability. I hesitated before replying, "Of course I do." But even as I spoke, I doubted the sincerity of my words. As tensions between Michael and Jason mounted, so did the pressure on me. Jason sought every opportunity to be close, his feelings evident in every interaction, while Michael's suspicion grew sharper with time. One weekend, Michael had to leave town for work. The thought of being alone with Jason resurfaced all my conflicted emotions. The moment Michael left, Jason approached me. His voice was resolute as he said, "Emily, we can't keep pretending these feelings don't exist. You deserve better than my dad. He doesn't see you or appreciate you, but I do. I'll always be here for you." Jason's words wrapped around me, leaving me at a loss for words. I realized just how disoriented my emotions had become. I couldn't recall the last time I felt so deeply understood, yet profoundly isolated all at once. But then, everything shifted abruptly. I heard the hum of a car engine outside. It was Michael's car. He had returned home, having canceled his meeting. A wave of panic surged through me as Jason stiffened instantly and withdrew to his room. When Michael entered, his gaze swept the room as if he were searching for something. "You seem a bit upset, Emily. Is everything all right?" he inquired, his tone gentle yet laced with suspicion. I assured him everything was fine, though it was a struggle to mask the unease simmering within me. That evening, we all retreated to our rooms, but sleep evaded me. I couldn't gauge how deeply Michael's doubts ran, but it was clear he sensed something wasn't right. Meanwhile, even in Michael's presence, Jason's subtle, stolen glances in my direction persisted. Day by day, the complex web of emotions between the three of us became increasingly intricate. This was no longer just between Jason and me. Michael was being drawn into the confusion as well. I had no idea where this would lead, but I could feel that everything was teetering on the edge. Michael's suspicions grew rapidly. His silent observations, pointed looks, and sudden probing questions left me uneasy. Jason, on the other hand, continued to express his feelings for me, seemingly indifferent to Michael's potential awareness. The tension in our home became suffocating. One evening, Michael arranged a dinner for the three of us. As Jason and I sat down at the table, Michael watched us intently, his silence thick with meaning. Finally, he broke the stillness. "Emily, I can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. Is there something you need to tell me?" His voice was calm but piercing. The air grew icy as I struggled to find words, my breath catching in my throat. But Michael pressed on. "Jason, you've been acting strangely for a while now. Something's happening, and I want the truth." Jason hesitated before rising from his seat. "Dad, maybe you should reflect on your own actions. Emily has always supported you, but you've never really noticed her," he said. His words sent shockwaves through me. Michael's face darkened as he stood, his anger spilling over. "What are you implying?" he demanded. The argument between them escalated rapidly. Jason accused Michael of taking me for granted and failing to give me the love I deserved. In that moment, Michael's suspicions crystallized, and he fully grasped Jason's feelings toward me. Unable to contain his anger, Michael made a drastic decision. "You're no longer welcome in this house, Jason. You've crossed a line, and from now on, you have no place here," he declared. Without a word, Jason packed his belongings and left. Watching him go, my heart shattered. Losing both Michael and Jason in different ways left me devastated. With Jason gone, the house felt eerily silent, but it did nothing to quiet the turmoil inside me. Over time, the bond between Michael and me eroded completely. Despite his attempts to salvage our marriage, the trust between us was irreparably broken. Eventually, I made the difficult decision to file for divorce. When I told Michael, I saw the pain in his eyes, but it seemed he had been anticipating it. He accepted the decision without protest. After the divorce, it took me a long time to heal. I never saw Jason again, but I heard he had moved on and was thriving. As I worked to rebuild my life, I realized the weight of the lessons this experience had taught me. Sometimes, following our emotions leads to consequences that are impossible to reverse. Looking back now, I understand the depth of my mistakes, but I also recognize how they shaped me into the person I am today. I finally moved beyond that dark chapter, finding solace in knowing it's all behind me. For now, I'll end the story here. The second part, where I delve into more personal and heartfelt moments, is even more captivating. If you'd like to hear it, please subscribe. I'm sure you'll find it just as compelling.